we continue looking at Judges, will be for some time, because that's important, going through not necessarily in the entire book of the Judges, but the judges as individuals. Although Abimelech is not a judge, he's the man who would be king. And as we looked last Sunday night, we talked about how he was the monarch of Mayhem, and that's exactly what he inflicted. And tonight we will be picking up where we left off. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to the book of Judges, Judges chapter 9. We'll begin reading in verse 1 and following again. Then Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem, to his mother's brothers, and spoke with them, and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone. And his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. And their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech. For they said, He is our brother. So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men. And they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, that word means house, house of the filling, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. Now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim, and lifted his voice and cried out, and said to them, Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees one was for, to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, Reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, Should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and men, and go and to sway over trees? Then the tree said to the fig tree, You come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, Should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to sway over trees? Then the trees said to the vine, You come and reign over us. But the vine said, Should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, to go sway over the trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, You come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, If in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. Now therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. But you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech the son of his female servant king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Millo. And let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo, and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled. He went to Beer and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech, his brother. May God bless the reading of his word. I know kind of a long passage, but to kind of set the stage. As we think about that, as we are reminded that Abimelech, as the sinful, scheming son and successor to Gideon, who had prideful, passionate pursuits, And people often scheme in seeking passionate and prideful pursuits today, but they do so in a way that does not honor God. And that can tempt any of us, the best of us even. Countess Elizabeth Bathory, or Bathory. In Hungarian is Erzsébet Bathory. She was a Hungarian countess. She was accused of killing 610 young women, according to experts. And I quote, on December the 30th, 1609, Bathory and her servants were arrested. The servants were put on trial in 1611, and 3 were executed. Although never tried, Bathory was confined to her chambers at Castle Cadiz, or Cadiz, I can't pronounce that. She remained there until she died. The reason that they pretty much held her prisoner was that the names of the victims were on a list in her own handwriting. Although as the centuries, and of course her story, I suppose, became the stuff of legend, which of course has affected some of the modern legends today, some of which you might be familiar with in the month of October. But with that said, it was later discovered that there was a grudge against that family, and that some of the so-called atrocities might have been, shall we say, doctored. Well, Abimelech did not have to doctor anything. And certainly his taking of the lives of his half-brothers, 70 in all, not minus the one, which would be Jotham, it is not the stuff of legend. We are reminded that Abimelech, in addition to being the monarch of mayhem, was and is the monarch of murder, because that's exactly what he did. He went to his father's house at Ophrah, and with the men that he had hired, worthless men, wicked men, killed his brothers, 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone, probably an altar-type stone. The image that you see on the screen, although I know it's graphic, but it's there for a reason, that may very well be what it might have looked like. Might have been something outside. It's an artist's rendering. But it's a reminder that this man knew no bounds in claiming the throne for himself. He had a murderous motive, and I would assume he thought he had a murderous mandate. He saw that his 70 brothers were a rival, a threat to his power. The practice of the day, when you had a large family, if you had a ruler of some kind and he had many sons, well, you tried to have it in such a way that they would not fight each other, that each one might know their own place. But usually the crown would go to the oldest, the firstborn, or the next one coming up, I suppose. But the culture was that if you were the heir apparent, or if you were ambitious enough, then if you kill all the rivals to the throne, then you're able to take the throne. You know, last man standing, I suppose. So Abimelech is operating. So from his point of view, he's not necessarily saying, well, I'm going to murder you. It's just nothing personal. It's just business. You know, it's like sometimes people have done business deals and can be quite ruthless, even though they might be a nice person up close and personal, but they don't bend or yield. Well, probably Abimelech was seeing, here's my chance, and I will let nothing stand in the way. This was a common practice in those days. You can see why there is this ongoing cycle in the Israelite history. As one generation is close to God, then they're going to act righteously, but each generation that begins to turn away from God begins to act unrighteously, so that, you know, the culture of the day, you probably don't think twice about what he did. Not you personally, but I'm just saying he did. And our own culture, in 2025, the further, sometimes, God forbid, the church turns away from the teachings of the Bible, then the more carnal we become, and we try to use carnal means to accomplish spiritual goals, and the result is often, well, mayhem. Maybe not murder like that, but certainly it is not healthy spiritually. And as our culture and as our nation turns away from its Judeo-Christian values, becoming more secular, then you begin to see different types of value systems coming to the forefront. I don't have to go into detail all the various social justice things that we see on TV on a regular basis. It's been a little bit better in some ways for the last year or so, but there for several years it had been very deplorable, and probably will go deplorable again, of course, over. As we turn away from God as a nation, the carnality rises up. We may be a spiritual nation, but we are not necessarily the Christian nation that we have prided ourselves on in the past, because we turned from God. Well, Abimelech, I don't even say he even turned to God to begin with, to turn away from God. But as the culture and the community he grew up in, as Israelites, even in Shechem, which had, I'm sure, Canaanite influences, they are continuing to turn away from God. So God is going to turn up the pressure. He's going to turn up the heat. He will bring and use Abimelech as a form of punishment upon the people, but then will turn around and punish Abimelech for what he did. He had a murderous motive. He gave the order. Well, actually, as he gave the order, he followed his instincts. I've met people who just sometimes have an instinct for doing business, and they're good. Or people who might have an instinct for politics, and they're smooth. Or even in ministry, I've met some people who, they just make it look so easy. I've met different preachers in different times and different places. One of my favorite, literally, a little side story for a moment. I met Dr. Robert Jeffries, pastor of First Baptist Church of Dallas. Might not should have said that live stream, but I'm not worried about it tonight. And not that much taller or shorter than me. A friend of mine wanted to introduce me to him. I'm okay, and we're still getting over the initial COVID time, so people are starting to come back to convention. And so I went to shake hands, and he wouldn't, because he was wanting to be germ-free. My bad. And so I just didn't think twice. So he said, fist bump. I said, okay. I went, boom, just like I do here on Wednesday night with many of you. My friend, I can't believe you should do that. I cannot believe you just did that. I did. But when I heard him preach, he just made it sound so easy. For some, they just have a gift, I guess, or an ability. I don't want to say instinct, because I use that word for Abimelech. In other words, some people just follow their instinct, and that can be good if it is consecrated to God. But in the case of Abimelech, he followed his instinct, and his instinct was utterly devoid of conscience. I wonder if he slept well at night. Sometimes we maybe have encountered people, or we have heard of people who just seem to act without a conscience. In psychological terms, that's sometimes called being a sociopath. Okay, some people who just have no conscience or do not act on a conscience. I suspect Abimelech would fit that. He gave the order and it's carried out. He acts with impunity, and that action is filled with iniquity. In other words, who gave him the right to decide that? Well, the men of Shechem, they voted me. Well, maybe they did, but because you influenced it. And then you bought the hired guns to help you out. But in essence, who gave him the right? Nobody gave him the right. He saw it, and he grabbed for it on his own and took that as a mandate. There's no record of any outrage by others for the loss of the sons of Gideon, except that provided by Jotham. Jotham bravely denounces his half-brother. And he denounces not just his half-brother, he denounces the people who have allowed this to happen. Sometimes we have to stop and we see things on the news, or maybe we hear things of the community, and as a church we need to, where is the outrage on certain things? I fear that so often, even as Christians, we get desensitized. Well, that's just the way things are. Or that may be the way things are, but that don't make it right. And so he is one of those who has acted with impunity. No record of outrage. As an application, the Bible challenges us, reminds us in Ecclesiastes 11, verse 9, walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, But know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment. Now, in that section in Ecclesiastes, that's both a positive and a negative. Let's talk about the positive real quick. Well, live your life. The writer of Ecclesiastes is not saying be huddled down and do nothing. Yeah, live your life. Live a little, enjoy your life, but just know that God is holding you accountable, God's watching, and that can be a good thing if you're living your life consecrated to God, you're living your life by faith, whether you are a young person or whether you're an adult or a senior adult, makes no difference, then know that that God will remember that, and there is a reward for that at some point, either in this life or certainly when we stand before Jesus one day. So that's a positive, but that's obviously the negative. In other words, you live how you want to live, okay, that's your choice. You can live how you want to live, but know there, as R.G. Lee, who was the pastor of Bellevue Baptist Church up in Memphis a long time ago, said there is a payday someday. And that's exactly what Abimelech, when Jotham calls Abimelech and the community out, he's saying, in essence, if y'all can say you've done everything great, and you can look God in the eye, and okay, we'll all be happy with each other. You deserve each other. But if not, let fire destroy. And actually, that is not just a proclamation. That becomes a prophecy. Because as we read through the remainder of Abimelech, not tonight, but as we read through the remainder, that will play out. Because it's an old adage that having is not always the same as wanting. Once you've got the brass ring, what do you do with it? And obviously, there's going to be disappointment on both sides. But walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment, both the positive as well as the negative. In Matthew 12:35, Jesus says, "A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things. And an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil things." Abimelech had a murderous motive. And he turned it into a mandate. But he also had a murderous method. The Old Testament Bible scholars tell us that the stone, again, your image on the screen, I direct your attention to it, that is probably a block, not just a rock, although it could have been. I'm not going to say that it wasn't, because stone can be a big rock, but may well have been more of a block, something that had been fashioned, used most likely in the temple or used in some type of pagan environment. That victim would have been executed one at a time. So how could he kill 70 or 69? How could he kill all of those? Well, when you got a bunch of thugs that you have hired as your strong-armed, army, yeah, you can overpower. And if you got a community that is willing to go along with it, yeah, you can probably be subdued. And you have really no choice in the matter. You're probably around, and they're taken in one at a time, and most likely run through with a knife or a sword, one at a time. It would have been better if he had just simply tried to take them out all at one moment, one at a time. He didn't just seize power. He made a statement about his power, that he wanted to be absolute and that he was ruthless. Bible experts Keel and Delitzsch say that this was a formal execution, not just a spur of the moment with the worthless men just kind of acting out in a riot. I suspect that they enjoyed what they did. They were brutal about it, ruthless with it, showed no mercy, but it was systematic murder, execution. These are the bankrupt men who are boiling over with zero restraint. A bloody omen of what would be the kingdom of the 10 tribes. Remember that Shechem is part of, I believe, the tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim and Manasseh are the two sons of Joseph. So Joseph, that's connected to Jacob. Jacob, who had adopted, actually Manasseh's firstborn, then Ephraim, but he switched hands when he adopted the sons or his grandsons. Ephraim, as a tribe, became a powerhouse in what is considered the North Kingdom when the kingdom was divided. During the time when Rehoboam did not listen to godly advice, because that was part of God's judgment because of the sins of Solomon. And therefore Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, comes to power, and he institutes a rival religion that eventually will morph into what the Samaritans are involved in. It's a long process, but just know that there is a connection there. And so part of the history of the northern kingdom that starts with Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, all the way down to the last of the kings until, I believe it is the, if I'm not mistaken, the Assyrians that take out the northern tribes. I could be off on that, but I think I'm right. With that said, there was a time of immense mayhem and chaos. They had more turnover because somebody murdered somebody, because somebody didn't like the other, and they all were fighting against each other. It was not necessarily a family dynasty handed down father to son. As it was in the southern kingdom, there's a lot more stability. It had to be because obviously from the throne of David will eventually come, Joseph and therefore Mary, which from them, we know that from Jesus is connected to the family of David, a virgin born by Mary, but she also has a connection to David as well. But in the northern kingdom, not so much, more of a violent, bloody turnover. And so they say that this was actually, in literature sometimes, you have a thing, what is called foreshadowing. When an event is described or something that is shared in a novel or in writing that is something that occurs that is going to kind of give you a kind of a preview of maybe what the whole story is going to be about, or if it's in a movie, what the movie actually is going to be about or how it's going to end. So writers use that sometimes to great effect. Well, this is not just a literary foreshadowing a moment. This is a time of a prophetic foreshadowing that what happened in micro with the 70 sons and Abimelech, the monarch of murder, is going to actually be lived out again and again and again by the northern kingdom. Others, such as Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, says that the brothers were slain on the stone altar, perhaps in revenge for Gideon's destruction of the altar of Baal. Remember, when Gideon got a start, God had told him, tear it down and build me an altar. And he did, but he did it under cover of darkness and had some help. And he gets the name Jerubbaal. In other words, let Baal or Baal, I actually prefer Baal because it's easier to pronounce, but you can pronounce it either way, Jerubbaal or Jerubbaal. Let Baal contend. In other words, you tore his altar down, Baal's coming for you. But God turns it around that Gideon is the one who is going to contend against Baal and all that Baal represents, particularly as it has such a hold on the Israelites. Now, granted, we know that Gideon had his ups and downs later on, but in those early days, he is fighting against Baal. So some have said that perhaps that this was in Abimelech's mind and perhaps the men of Shechem's mind that, your father tore down the altar of Baal. It's only right that you're sacrificed on an altar of a pagan god. Kind of payback. It's about sending a message. But what a terrible message Abimelech sent. The Bible tells us in 2 Kings, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to annihilate all the royal heirs. But Jehosheba, daughter of King Joram, the sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole or hid him away from the sons of the king who were being murdered. So this is not an isolated thing, but part of a carnal culture and a murderous method. It talks about in 2 Chronicles 21, and Jehoshaphat rested with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. Then Jehoram his son reigned in his place. He had brothers, the sons of Jehoshaphat, Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariahu, Michael, and Shephatiah, or Shephatiah. All these were the sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. Their father gave them great gifts of silver and gold and precious things with fortified cities in Judah. Trying to keep them all happy. But he gave the kingdom to Jehoram because he was the firstborn. Now, when Jehoram was established over the kingdom of his father, he strengthened himself and killed all his brothers with a sword. and also others of the princes of Israel. So again, this is not something that was just an isolated event. Abimelech is going to do what's going to be done many other times. But it is a terrible situation. You say, well, that's nice. We've had a snapshot of Abimelech as the monarch of mayhem and the monarch of murder. But how do we apply this to the Chunky Baptist Church? You and I, we too are warned. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, or blockhead, I think is a modern translation, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, because you're making a value judgment against somebody. You're putting yourself in the place of God. You fool shall be in danger of hellfire. Matthew 5:22. Murderous motives, mandates, methods, all begin in the heart. You say, preacher, none of us are going to commit murder. I pray God you don't. I mean, that would not be a good thing to do. But sometimes, just like Abimelech, you might have, maybe there was some anger and resentment built up towards the family. Maybe because his mother was a concubine and not a regular member of the harem or the wife, certain plural wives. That was the culture of the day. God has always been one man biologically and one man, one woman. I'll try it again. One man biologically and one woman biologically in marriage. That's always been the design, but the culture in that time allowed for men to have multiple wives. And maybe there was anger built up, and Abimelech decides to act out on that anger. Sometimes you and I, or we, or others can have anger in the heart, while we may never put people on a block and slay them, and yet we might do the same by what we post online, sometimes by what we say as we're talking about people. That's why I'm always encouraging you, speak life to people. Speak life over one another. Encourage one another. That passage, I think I have it, that kind of passage is actually a poem, but I have it out here and other places. Speak life over people. Remind them of who they are. Pray over them. Empower them. Give them grace when they need it. Be a voice God uses in their life. In a world where the enemy is constantly speaking lies, choose to speak life over them. So yeah, we can be in the same ballpark, at least spiritually. Maybe not physically killing somebody, but when we're allowing that anger, we're allowing that resentment, that bitterness, when we allow that negativity, when we allow that pride and ambition to overwhelm, we might, in a spiritual sense, act just like Abimelech. What might be perceived as a rival or a threat in your life, how will you respond? Will you pray for them like Jesus did? I mean, think about it. Jesus has been beaten. He's been spit upon. He's actually had, as Isaiah said, parts of his beard torn out. He is a bloody mess. He has been literally forced to carry the crossbeam section and stumbling and falling. And as he is finally nailed to the cross and hoisted up, he is without clothing. Now, I know the movies show the loincloth, but in the Roman crucifixion, they would strip you down. They will brutalize you and dehumanize you, and you're hanging there in misery and total humiliation. And if anybody had a right to be bitter and angry towards his enemies, calling down legions of angels to strike them dead, Jesus had that right. But here's what he says. He says, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. They're casting lots. In other words, they're throwing dice for his clothing. Oblivious that this is the Son of God as well as the Son of Man. And yet he chose to forgive. Will you and I pray for whatever threat or whatever enemy might be in our life? Or will we be just simply out to get them, like Abimelech did? Some seek to gain by force, or some seek to gain by forcing something that does not belong to them, rather than simply walking by faith. And pride is the predator that promotes all sorts of conflict. Pride pushes you to become something heinous. Or God forbid, it may reveal the real you. It's always been said, give a man a mask and he'll show you who he really is. I believe one of the
philosophers in ancient time, and I know different preachers such as D.L. Moody and others have said, you know, who you are when you're by yourself, alone and in the dark, that's who you are. Sometimes pride, you know, maybe we put on a mask, but perhaps pride is the mask that we wear, or either we take the mask off and we can act just as heinous. Maybe not killing 70 people on a stone, but just as heinous. We need to surrender and submit that pride to Jesus, and do it quickly. Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? You lust, that is strong desire. You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and you do not receive because you ask amiss that you may spend it on your pleasures. James 4:1-3. God forbid that sometimes perhaps covetousness grabs a hold. And maybe like Abimelech, you know, we will do whatever we think we have to do to get what we think we deserve, when maybe the other way around is, God, grant me what you want me to have. Even if it's not what I would like to have, but whatever you give me, that is what will be best, because that's what will, first of all, glorify you, and then as a result, be good. Matthew 15:19, for out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, you know, hating somebody so much that you might not ever lift a finger against them, but if you heard that they were dead, you're not going to shed a tear. That's a cold place to be. How different is that from Abimelech? All Abimelech did is just act out on it. Adultery, immorality, theft, false testimony, slander, all these things come from the heart, because the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked, and only God can know it. That's why we always have to make sure we guard our heart, because out of that come the issues of life, and make sure that our heart has been changed from the inside out by the grace of Jesus Christ and by His shed blood. We all need to have that regular spiritual heart checkup with Jesus, who is the great physician. Let Him be the one that makes the diagnosis and the prognosis and the prescription. Some may even need a complete spiritual heart transplant. We are reminded in Scripture, for all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life is not from the Father, but from the world. So those who consented to Abimelech's method, they were just as guilty. Jotham had every right to call them out. Jotham is God's witness who issues an indictment that is literally going to be executed by God in the near future in this passage. We are reminded, when we think about Abimelech and the community of Shechem and what is going to take place after he has now become the king. Galatians 6:7, do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. God is not ever mocked by anyone's mayhem, motives, methods, mandate, whatever you want to call it. What is allowed will be the grounds for judgment or justice, discipline, whatever. Today, we have to be aware, acting on desires that can ensure maybe the downfall of others as well as ourselves. Because human depravity exists. And except for the grace of God, that could be you and me in the place of Abimelech. Oh no, preacher, I wouldn't do that. Well, again, I hope you wouldn't. But on a spiritual level, we all are sinners. We're either sinners saved by grace, or we're sinners in need of salvation by grace. As we stand and sing our hymn of invitation, as our worship leaders come, Jesus is tenderly calling. Whatever the Lord may be calling you to do, or to be, or maybe just to come and pray, I invite you to respond as the Lord calls you today.